Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Managing the Customer Lifecycle Through Data Science, presented jointly by Simility and Socure. My name is Kim Peterson and I am pleased to introduce today's panelists. Before I do, a few housekeeping items. We will conclude this presentation with a question and answer session. You can submit questions at any time in the question portion of the console, and we will do our best to answer them all. If we are not able to answer your question during the live webinar, we will follow up with you individually. Also, you can find additional resources in the resources portion of your console for downloading and reviewing when convenient. We are excited to hear from our presenters today, Kedar Samant, CTO and co-founder of Simility, and Johnny Ayers, SVP and co-founder of Socure. I want to give you a little background on each of our speakers before I hand it over to them. Kedar co-founded Simility and crafted the vision for Simility's disruptive approach to fraud management. He has been key driving innovations that culminated in Simility's recent acquisition by PayPal. Prior to Simility, he was at Google, where he built a platform for fighting fraud and abuse across Google's products. Johnny is also an industry expert on fraud prediction, authentication, and identity verification. He helped craft the ID Plus solution into a powerfully predictive tool for Tier 1 financial institutions and e-commerce providers to better understand digital identity and onboard new customers. Socure is the second company he's co-founded. In his spare time, he's an advisor and mentor to a number of well-known and fast-growing startups in New York City. I am pleased at this time to turn it over to our speakers.
Thanks, Kim. The focus of today's webinar is looking at customer lifecycle in this global economy. Specifically, we'll be looking at proofing against fraud and risk in that entire user lifecycle. So let's look at some of the key aspects that is defining this user engagement in this global economy. At the top, you have this notion of digital first, right? It goes without saying businesses are formulating their strategy, primarily assuming a digital engagement on the user side. Next is omnichannel, right? Everything is omnichannel today, where users are engaging online, offline, with multiple devices, and so on. Thirdly, you need to understand there are regulatory challenges that businesses need to manage when it comes to the customer life cycle, right from onboarding, looking at KYC, and then over the life cycle, looking at monitoring transactions and so on. And of course, all this with the business models disrupting how traditionally business were done, changing how users are engaging. So you're looking at mobile check deposit in an online-only bank. You're looking at sharing economies or marketplaces, which is redefining the notion of buyer, the notion of seller, the notion of what defines a transaction. All of that is changing, and within now that you need to understand that the fraud and risks challenges are also rapidly evolving. How can businesses proof the entire user life cycle, right from onboarding, to subsequent transactions and so on. From a fraud lens, you can think of two broad buckets to analyze. First is the notion of who you are. This applies to your identity, your physical identity, your digital identity, your device identity, your historical risk profile, and so on. And second is this notion of what you do. Example, how quickly are you moving money after you log in? Where are you logging in from? How much money are you moving, and so on. Even the beneficiary who's the recipient of your transfer, right? So to proof against the entire user life cycle, which is who you need to get both of these, who you are and what you do. You need to make them work together really well. Example, if you're a senior citizen from East Coast, you're far less likely to log in from California on a Saturday night at midnight and buy a $500 ticket to a Ariana Grande rock concert in Chicago next week. right? I mean, these are essentially kind of fraud signals that you can quickly analyze when you put both of them together, who you are and what you do. So you can translate these two things from a user life cycle point of view into three broad, what I would call as choke points. First is you make sure you catch fraudsters during account origination, right? You catch them early. So here you're dealing with fake accounts, stolen identity, first-party fraud, third-party fraud, and so on. Right? So you're looking at proofing the account origination piece. Second, you're looking to protect access flow, the login part. This can prevent things like account takeover or synthetic activity and so on. And third is this notion of transaction. Essentially, any subsequent event downstream, once you created your account and you log in, those could be called as transactions, and those transactions could be a money transfer, a CNP, transaction, or even user activity like resetting your password and so on. You need to proof each of those transactions downstream. So let's look at each of those, these three choke points a little bit deeper. The first choke point is account origination. The goal here is simple. Catch accounts at sign up, so catch bad users early, reduce fraud losses downstream, reduce friction for good users, and increase automation overall. So Simility is offering on the account onboarding side, we use our device intelligence module here. We use third-party augmentation and third-party intelligence specifically for identity proofing, where we rely on partnerships with Socure, and then we build and deploy our ML models using all of the data from the third-party intelligence, identity data, device intelligence, and then put all of that in our machine learning models. And finally, we tune the onboarding flow without decision orchestration, where you can specify specify strategies, you can tune existing strategies, you can run champion challenger, and then you can essentially enable a complex onboarding flow very easily. One of our customers who are using our onboarding origination module, they were able to achieve 70% reduction in fraudulent accounts caught at sign up, while keeping a high level of automation, and all of that while achieving massive growth in their business. The second choke point is catching badness at account login time or at access time. The focus here is profiling users, profiling devices, and then catching primarily account takeover attempts. And also synthetic access, on those accounts, again, while reducing friction to good users. So Simility offering here uses our device intelligence module again, but specifically, we leverage our behavior analytics within that, and then we do a lot of deep learning, with supervised models and unsupervised models. That identify anomalies which are representative of account takeover events. Of course, all of that needs to be done real time with a low latency, 30 milliseconds, 40 milliseconds, and so on, end to end, right? And then finally, we have our decision orchestration layer, where again you can implement a very complex flow easily. Raising a risk-based challenge. Whether they are KBA driven or token driven or biometric driven. So let's say you want to implement where you're automatically blocking confirmed bad access, and then let's say for 2% of the cases you're throwing a voice or a biometric based challenge, face recognition or so on. And for legacy users who may not have the luxury of a biometric-based challenge, you can throw, let's say, 3% of the cases, you might throw an SMS-based challenge, right? And then getting that feedback real time to retune your model and then retune your strategies focused on reducing friction and catching bad access to the user accounts. Now let's look at the third choke point in the user life cycle after account creation and after login. We're talking about transactions, and then transactions, essentially could be anywhere from CNP transactions for merchants, for issuers, or an ACH transfer for a bank, or a mobile check deposit, and so on. Simility provides an overall account monitoring offering. And here we essentially do in-session monitoring for, focused on anomaly detection for fraudulent activities or any specific anomaly on that flow. We use graph analytics, linking entities, bringing to life, risk signals, cross entities, stitched at an account level or even at network level. We use ontology-driven feature engineering, where we can extract thousands of signals, whether they're velocity-based, network deviations, historical aggregates, and that too on any custom structured or unstructured data feed. And finally, using ML framework, which is extensible, we build and deploy purpose-built models using various ML stacks, R, Python, H2O, TensorFlow, and so on. But essentially, the purpose-built models are tuned to cater to those specific transaction types. And since we proof against multiple user flow downstream in that user life cycle, we see a big dent in the overall fraud losses for our customers. So, one of our customer in the online classified marketplace, area, we saw that, a customer of ours reduced their fraud losses by 80%. And we did so by protecting not only their CNP transactions, from a buyer side, but also taking down fake listings, and proofing against seller fraud. So here is the view of our solution and our offerings for protecting the entire user life cycle, from account origination, which is our identity assurance offering, authentication or login protection, and then fraud prevention on downstream activities, including transaction fraud. So what powers our solution is our core platform, which lets us be adaptive, flexible, and essentially stay ahead of the fraudsters, thereby protecting and empowering our customers in that process. I can do a quick peek of our platform modules, our data intelligence module, our extensible ML stack, our decision orchestration layer, and then finally our easy and powerful Workbench. And all of that, which is is enabled by our enterprise data lake layer, which powers the platform stack. Yeah, so let me do a click down into our platform. So from the data side, we provide a flexible, extensible data model. We also ingest structured and unstructured data. We do real-time stitching of that into graphs. We transform and enrich data on the fly. And what's important is we're able to augment and enhance the data model using third-party data. Right? We're talking about Socure. We partner with them and take in identity data. And this is useful not just during the account onboarding piece of taking identity intelligence and proofing on account onboarding, but also downstream when you're talking about doing proofing on transaction fraud. Being able to internalize the data goes a long way. We also have this notion of dynamic ontologies, which essentially we're able to apply and create thousands of features on top of any data by categorizing and structuring that as part of known ontologies. Take an example of email. Minute we see email in the data, we immediately apply few hundreds of features which are very email specific, and then use that downstream in our models. And finally, as the data is ingested, we annotate and build and expand our data lake with all of the relevant intelligence in it. And from a user lifecycle point of view, it helps us add multiple data feeds seamlessly, generate intelligence on top of it, get intelligence from our partners, like Socure, and then put it all together in models and apply strategies, and that end-to-end, of taking in a new data feed and extracting intelligence and applying it in decision making. You can do it in as little as few hours. So this ability to keep yourself very quick and relevant when it comes to data ingest helps us be relevant, and beat fraudsters very quickly. So on ML side, our philosophy has been to make sure we make the human intuition and machine learning really work well together. And to that end, our focus has been to generate deep analytics, which is explainable and not a black box. Next is our notion of a flexible, extensible ML framework where we can build models and deploy them in R, in Python, in H2O, TensorFlow, and so on. And in our Workbench, using the extensible framework, you can test strategies or deploy models, pre-built models on known flows, on known data models, or you can build and deploy models which are are purpose-built on specific custom flows. Or you can deploy existing ML models which which are legacy, which already exists on our customer side. An example would be a legacy R model that you would want to just drag and drop into our framework. And then lastly, again, the idea is to make sure we enable data scientists and data analysts to respond faster than what what fraudsters do and how fraud mutates. From a user lifecycle management, end user lifecycle management, what it gives here is tremendous power to build specific models for specific flows. For example, unsupervised anomaly detection model is really powerful in catching account takeover events on the login side, or a supervised transaction fraud prevention model on chargeback side, and so on. So historically, where certain combination of model works really well or doesn't work really well, we have the ability to kind of define a specific flow for specific models for specific flows. Our decision orchestration layer puts all of these things together to make the final decision about an event, right? So whether it's approving an account or rejecting or declining a transaction or blocking a login attempt and so on. Key here is being able to implement and effectively manage complex flows. We talk about account onboarding. You should be able to manage a very complex flow elegantly with complete control and having solid explainability in that process. This module also helps us implement champion challenger scenarios where we right from the UI, where you can do analysis using historical data, what if analysis, or you can deploy multiple strategies and say for 90% of the cases use strategy A with this model and so on, and for 5% of the cases use model B or combination of model B and C with these strategies and so on, right? So this ability to run that champion challenger while at the same time having what if analysis done on historical data, that combination really helps you be in control when it comes to decision orchestration. In fact, in our last release, we are now offering this notion of automatic strategy tuning, where we use ML pipeline to tune an existing strategy, an existing human-defined strategy, or recommend an enhancement to that, or come up with a new strategy which is fairly powerful on explainability. So this essentially gives you the power of ML models while keeping the explainability and the control of human-defined strategies. And lastly, with this notion of entire data, machine learning models, analytics, and so on, and then the decision orchestration, you can think of a time from data feed to decision, building that entire flow in a matter of hours. So if you want to enable a new user engagement end to end, you should be able to do that very quickly, from data to decisions. And of course, our platform capabilities come to life using our Workbench, right? And which is built for with fraud management in mind. And a Workbench, is primarily used in two ways. Right? One is it's used by data scientists, data analysts, domain experts to define, the entire user life cycle. So, right from data model definition, feature engineering, model deployment, strategy tuning, testing, and all of that. So essentially configuring your risk engine, your decision engine. And it also serves the purpose of a case manager, where you can implement a review workflow, you can inspect particular events, make decisions on particular events, escalate it, and generate a feedback cycle where every decision that you're taking feeds back into the machine learning model where it is improving. And of course, you have the visualization piece, which again, we have widgets when you're talking about case inspection and case management. You have visualization that helps you really look at particular events nicely stitched together, looking at the timeline view, looking at the graph view, and so on, to really help analysts, look at fraud in for a particular user and so on. Our data lake that powers the platform is not just any other data lake, but essentially data lake that is purpose-built for a real-time fraud and risk management decision engine. And what I mean by that is, few things here. One is, we take in transactional data, historical data, computed signals, and then and stitch them as massive graphs. We then generate, aggregate information, aggregate signals or graph analytics, and then store it back into the data lake. So now this data lake essentially powers, two flows. One is, scoring of real-time models and real-time decisioning, which is essentially low latency. You're talking about 20, 30 milliseconds onwards. And then it also serves as a data stack to build ML models offline or do near real-time or historical hypothesis testing or what-if analysis and so on. And from a user lifecycle management point of view, the key here is elegantly stitching multiple entity engagement, these events together. So whether they are IPs and devices and users and so on, or they could be used to stitch multiple engagements of the user over time. So user logging in, essentially user creating an account, logging in, and doing multiple transactions, and then generating risk intelligence on top of it, right? So let's say you want to use a velocity signal, or a specific graph analytic signal, let's say a cluster score of an IP that was used by the user during sign up. Combine that information and that data with historical transactions done by the user in the entire life cycle or entire lifetime, and then use all of that information, stitched together, use all of that data in a model to score a new event that is happening right now, real time, right? So let's say you're resetting, your user is resetting the password. Can I use all of that data historically nicely stitched and use that in a model to score a real time check on a password reset event, right? So this ability to continuously monitor user engagement, what we call as ongoing user assurance, that is only possible because of our purpose-built real-time data lake. And lastly, we expose our data lakes to our customers, right? And this empowers them to power some of their other enterprise systems downstream, that would use this rich data, fraud-specific data from the data lake, or expose fraud score as a service for other enterprise systems, right? And this has been a big differentiator for us and for our customers, the fraud-centric real-time data lake. Now that we talked about the three flows and the three choke points from account origination, login, and transaction fraud, and how we from Simility provide an offering at a platform level to power those three solutions, let's zoom in on one of the flows, which is very key right at the beginning, account origination, where you want to make sure you catch the majority of the fraudulent activity, especially during the sign up time. So from an account origination flow, you can see there are multiple pieces working together, using historical data, blacklist, whitelist, third-party data, and so on. We'll talk more about this when we talk about how we and Socure partner together to enable an account onboarding flow. So when it comes to account, origination and proofing account origination flow, the most vital piece of information there is verifying the user identity and essentially risk profiling that user identity. In that process, you can even break it down into analyzing individual identities within that. So, the user's device, name, email address, phone number, bureau data, social data, and so on. And our partnership with Socure helps both of us to provide a complete seamless solution for onboarding to our customers. Do the deep risk profiling of identities using Socure, and then do the overall orchestration for onboarding workflow using Simility. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Johnny to talk more about Socure. Johnny, over to you.
Thanks so much, Kedar. So there's a couple of reasons why the current rules-based and credit bureau-based solutions just don't work anymore. The first is data breaches. In 2017 alone, over 1,200 data breaches occurred, with over 2 billion identities being stolen globally. In just the last 12 months, 2/3 of the adult population, their names, address, date of birth, social security number, driver's license, were all stolen in a single credit bureau breach. What this has caused is a rapidly evolving type of fraud. In just the first half of 2018, we've seen identity theft and synthetic ID attacks double and in some cases triple from Q4 2017. At the same time, you have a rapidly changing type of demographics where 35–40% of millennials are completely outside of the Bureau's ability to positively verify them, as they're delaying major credit purchases such as mortgages and auto loans, as student loan debt has balloons, substantially changing the way that this young millennial audience uses credit. Combined with breaches and new types of fraud attacks and this new millennial discerning audience, it's really time for a superior identity verification service to be delivered into the market. What does the future of identity verification and fraud prediction look like? It must be dynamic. We have to move away from exclusively using static rules and deploy machine learning models that are consistently, constantly learning. They're constantly getting the newest forms of fraud feedback. They're constantly adding new data points. They're constantly looking at the evolution of an identity over time as we move, as we change jobs, as we open new accounts. it must be frictionless. So much of identity verification today is active, using things like out-of-wallet questions that are unnecessarily friction-heavy, they're unnecessarily expensive, and the majority of these kind of questions and answers are very easily obtained by fraudulent actors because they were released in many of these data breaches. And the future of identity verification must be accurate. So many of the point solutions and credit bureau solutions that are existing in the market today have 10-to-1, 5-to-1 false positive ratios. At Socure, we believe that 1-to-1 or better is absolutely what must be delivered to ensure that the optimal customer experience is being delivered to your good consumers. You're not driving away these folks that you spend so much money to acquire, while at the same time, you're incredibly accurately predicting the fraudulent individuals, the individuals that are going to cost you massively in losses. And so to be dynamic and frictionless and accurate is where we believe the future of identity verification and fraud prediction is going. It's important to understand how we got here today in identity verification. 20, 30 years ago, the credit bureaus were really the only game in town. Leveraging basically credit header, credit application information, and then throwing rules was really how both KYC, CIP, as well as basic fraud prediction took place. About 15 years ago, you had the device fingerprinting vendors that started to pull in browser information, device-related information. Again, using static scorecards. Over the past 10 years, you've seen point solution providers, email verification, phone verification, address, IP, companies looking at siloed views of the identity. Again, mainly using rules-based systems. No one has really pulled the entire identity together, which is really what we've tried to solve for here at Socure. Is how do we look at every facet of a consumer's identity: email, phone, social, utilities, energy, credit. Pulling every facet of a consumer's identity together to both positively verify as many good people as possible, while obviously more accurately predicting those nefarious actors. And then on the x-axis, you see analytics. So one of the reasons that we feel we're uniquely positioned in the space is that we've built robots, machine learning engines to do data analysis, feature engineering, model development, model monitoring, and then dynamically providing fraud performance feedback into the models. This is really what's enabled us to deliver such accuracy and such broad coverage in our identity verification models. Digging a bit deeper into the previous slide, the first piece of what Socure's robot does is we source live digital data. Every consumer leads a very digital life. We email, we text, we tweet, we post, we create cookies as we move about the internet. And this leaves a huge amount of digital breadcrumbs about normal good consumers. And so the first piece that our robot does is we source an enormous amount of consumer-related information across their entire identity. The second thing that our identity verification fraud prediction robot does is that it's able to uniquely correlate identity data over thousands of different attributes. We're able to connect your name to your date of birth to your address to where you live on LinkedIn, your LinkedIn to all known previous addresses, your email to your phone. And so what Socure allows our customers to do is really build a graph of the consumer's identity across every facet, some which are explicitly known, many of which are inferenced by the machine. By combining the entire digital identity and being able to correlate hundreds to thousands of disparate data points with the building of various types of supervised machine learning. This allows our robot to create a holistic, much more accurate view of a consumer's identity. And really, this is what enables us to more accurately classify good versus bad consumers that really only machines have the ability to do versus human intuition alone. The core engine of Socure, or the brains of the machine, are really this iterative loop of dynamic learning. The first piece that Socure has automated is our framework for data analysis. In being able to verify 3, 4, 5 new data sources a quarter, Socure perpetually has the best, most accurate, most comprehensive underlying raw data sets that are available in the market. The second piece that our machine or our robot has automated is feature engineering or feature generation. This serves as a proprietary predictor base that Socure has been able to build machine learning models off of. The third piece is training and the building of our machine learning models. Socure uses multiple types of machine learning algorithms and builds hundreds of variations of a model, testing for the most accurate model given a dependent variable and given a data set using AUC, KS, F1, and the machine basically competes against hundreds of other types of models. The third piece that we've automated is the deployment of these models. The fifth piece is the monitoring. So everything in our system is monitored by a series of robots. And then the closed loop is the automated performance feedback that we receive from all of our customers. This allows the machine to constantly determine if the model or models that are deployed in production are the most accurate. And so there's this perpetual learning cycle, this dynamic learning cycle that allows Socure to always have the most accurate, most stable, most predictive models deployed in production at any point in time. So what is all these machine learning capabilities? What does the usage of dynamic modeling and the digital identity mean in terms of performance, for Socure's customers? It really depends on the problem that you're looking to solve. If it's increasing auto acceptance rates, if it's reducing fraud losses, if it's increasing automation or decreasing manual review and active authentication, there's certainly enormous amounts of value that we can deliver across this value chain. The first piece that we've seen in value add in some of our deployments with Simility is increasing auto approvals. We have a well-known consumer-facing fintech where we were able to increase their CIP auto approval rates by over 30%. We have a top 5 issuer where we were able to cut their fraud by north of 60%. Versus their entire existing tool set. We have a major consumer lender where we are 10 times more accurate than the credit bureau solution that they were previously using and just canceled their contract with. We have service providers across payroll, retail, financial services that have looked at automation or out-of-wallet friction as being the problem they want to solve, and generally we're 50, 60, 70% increases in terms of automation or out-of-wallet minimization. So, the deployment in using these machine learning models can have immense impacts in both top-line revenue, automation, customer friction, as well as in savings of the bottom line in terms of fraud reduction.
Hi, so let's again look at the account origination flow with different pieces coming in. So right from the application data to the decision, you have all of the identity checks and you have all the intelligence coming in. So Johnny, you want to talk about the key pieces from the Socure side?
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things that I think is particularly interesting is how Socure and Simility is able to work together and deliver machine learning predictions from different elements of an application. From our perspective, we're really hyper-focused on the identity. So a great example, I think, is where Socure sees a brand new email connected to a prepaid phone that's not connected to the address provided. That's a certain distance away from the IP. And so Socure is able to deliver, a number of identity-related predictions, that then Simility is able to tie in a whole bunch of additional attributes too. So I don't know, Kedar, if you want to speak to kind of how those two elements are seamlessly intertwined.
Sure. Yeah. Once we get the intelligence piece about the identity from Socure, we add in our device profiling, the device intelligence piece on top of that, and then we also take in custom feed from the enterprise. So this could be sign up event feeds and so on. Put all of that together. Run our meta model as well. And then that's where you can have the decision orchestration to get your automation for approval, for reject, and then you can also review these cases, whether they are pre-fact or post-fact, and then feed it back into that engine to improve your automation on an ongoing basis.
So let's talk about a specific use case that Socure and Simility has delivered into the market. So we both had a customer that was unhappy with their incumbent solution. Their approval rates, their auto approval rates were down in the 60%. They were using KBA out of wallet questions nearly 40% of all applications, and their identity fraud losses were just not sustainable as they scaled. And so, Kedar, do you want to speak to the solution that this particular customer implemented?
Sure. Yeah. So we went in together. On the Simility side, we deployed our platform to the entire orchestration that included the custom data feed from that customer, historical data, device fingerprinting, our machine learning models, and we took in Socure entire intelligence piece of identity and put all of that together to kind of achieve the business objectives of reducing friction, increasing automation, and catching user during sign up. The key thing to call out here was our ability to do the champion challenger, especially in the account onboarding flow, where you really want to understand and deploy multiple strategies running side by side, a typical 95-5 split and so on. So we did a champion challenger strategy, and then the results were just outstanding. Maybe John, you can talk about the results there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, in terms of auto approval rate, I mean, we took auto approval rates from the low 60s up into the mid 80s. Overall approval rates hit nearly 90%. We were able to, combined with Simility, take their fraud losses down by over 80%. And KBA usage was cut by well over 70%. And so what we found is that the combination of Simility's machine learning capabilities and all the modeling that they've done with the customer data in combination with what we've been able to do with the identity has massively improved the automation and efficiency for this customer's origination use case.
Okay, one more happy customer who is using Socure and Simility together. All right, so with that, I wanted to quickly do a overview about Simility. Rahul, Uttam, and I, we started Simility in 2014 with the goal of building an adaptive fraud and risk management solution. We provide solutions for customers in different verticals, financial services, banks, FIs, and so on, in payments, in retail, in online services, media, marketplaces, classifieds, and so on. And from 2 months ago, we are really excited to be part of the PayPal family, and then we'll continue our journey forward in this space. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Johnny. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about Socure.
Sunil and I founded Socure to leverage and harness the power of the internet to build a future of identity verification and fraud prediction in a digital world. Over the past 6 years, we've built an incredible team of data scientists, engineers, visionaries, and folks to build and support our customer base, which now includes 2 of the top 5 banks, 4 of the top 10 issuers, 2 of the top 3 remittance companies, the largest payroll service providers, and one of the largest retailers in the world. We're fully enterprise ready. Security is core to everything we do. We have multiple years of SOC 2 audits. We have 3 different ISO certifications. And certainly we have an amazing group of investors, including some of our largest partners and customers in the market today.
Thank you, Kedar and Johnny. I think we've heard some really good information today about enhancing our digital fraud prevention, and I hope that you guys have gotten a lot of good information from what you've heard today. We've gotten a lot of really good questions during your presentation, so we're going to go ahead and move into our question and answer period. And I'm going to start, Kedar, by passing this one over to you. It looks like we've got a couple of questions on this topic, and it's along the lines of, you've talked a lot about complex decisioning orchestration, so what are some of the trends that are driving this shift?
Sure, yeah. So if you look at how the business has changed, and we talked about omni-channel, multi-channel. We talked about users with different business models. So as these gets the businesses gets fairly complex, your ability to make sure that you have a decisioning layer that takes into account different data feeds, different level of intelligence, and so on, and then put that to maximize being able to catch fraud and reduce friction. So a good example would be, let's say you have a user coming in from a particular channel. You want to apply a separate set of decisioning models, a separate set of thresholds, and so on, and then let it go through. And you might have a separate onboarding, where you want to add a level of data requisition. So what do? You kind of put that user on hold, ask for additional data, whether it is documentation and so on. Once you get that, you reevaluate that particular onboarding experience, and then you kind of approve it. So this complex way of kind of understanding different models, applying different machine learning models, applying different checks in the process, and then maximizing your overall business objective, which is reducing your friction overall, automating as much as you can on the overall user experience, and of course catch the bad guys. So that's kind of the shift is driven by more complex channels and more complex user behavior, translating that into making decisioning process easy for you.
Okay, great. All right, so the next question that we have, Johnny, I think I'm going to send this one over to you, and it is, what do you think is the #1 trend right now in fighting fraud?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Kim. So from our perspective, I think over the past 15 years, 20 years, you've seen an enormous amount of both investment and then M&A activity in the account takeover space. There's been so much smart minds that have gone after transaction fraud that you recently have seen a huge amount of the fraudsters move from existing accounts into new account originations. And with the glut of stolen information, there being over 1,200 data breaches in 2017 alone, including one of the credit bureaus that leaked 2/3 of the adult population, you've seen this glut of stolen data basically be a gold mine for fraudsters to attack at new acquisition. So I'd say probably the biggest trend that we're seeing right now, which has been great for Socure, has been basically the doubling or tripling of identity theft and synthetic ID attacks at new account opening.
Okay, well, that's really interesting to hear, and I suspect that's pretty similar to what Simility sees as well, which I think in a way kind of ties into this next question. Kedar, I'll send this one to you. And this goes back to the customer lifecycle and asks, any insights on how identity data is used throughout the lifecycle?
Yeah, good question, and that's where that entire life cycle management comes in. Is you right at the onset, you want to catch them early. You want to make sure, as Johnny said, as much as early as possible you catch the bad guys. But there are times when the identities might look pretty, good users go bad, or bad things happen to good users as well. So being able to use the identity data during sign up, and that's not just score. It includes the entire information about that user during sign up. Take an example. Knowing that this is an identity or this is a user who signed up from Kansas City, and during sign up, the sign up happened at on a weekday at a good hour and so on, and the age of that the age of that account and so on and so forth. Using that information downstream, if you see an account doing a transaction or ordering a checkbook, you can stitch in the sign-up intelligence, the onboarding intelligence, and then kind of evaluate the entire transaction or ongoing engagement about that user. So this ability to maximize or essentially assure the validity of a user for every action, and use your identity and onboarding information throughout the life cycle, we see tremendous lift in proofing every user action downstream using that identity data.
Okay, great. So we're getting a lot of really good questions. There's a number that have come in. This next question I'm going to open up to both speakers and whoever wants to grab this one, and that is, how is this any different than what my credit bureau has been doing for years?
Yeah, thanks. You want to take that? Yeah, of course. So I think there's a couple of pieces, right? I think one is, most of the bureaus have built, very large acquired data sets, mainly related to credit transaction history and credit application data. And then in using that kind of static credit data that they own, they're building decision trees or rule sets or big if-then statements where they're looking at kind of static human-derived intuitions around what represents good and what represents bad. I think one of the things that we've tried to do very much differently is looking at every facet of a consumer's identity, email data, phone data, IP data, traditional offline data, energy, utility, phone records, and then as opposed to writing standard rules, we're applying various forms of deep learning and gradient boosting and kind of the newest forms of machine learning to reason over tens to hundreds of different predictors to solve the problem. And so, generally by applying new types of data, better feature engineering, and machine learning, we're generating 5x, 10x more accurate predictions, which is driving enormous net new revenue of new customers and certainly massive efficiencies and fraud reduction.
Right. I can add a little bit there as well. Is what Johnny said is ability to consume as much as data as possible, and then do the right feature engineering, being relevant, applying the machine learning models and so on goes a long way. And the second part is how quickly can you ingest a new feed and make it work for you, right? So that also goes a long way in being relevant. You might see your the continuous improvement is kind of the rule of the game here. Is your model today might be at 95% accurate, and then unless and until you are very agile and unless you're very adaptable in continuously improving your data quality, your new data feed, your new data model, you're going to you're not going to stay relevant for a long time. And that kind of differentiates companies like us, where our solution is making sure that we stay relevant. The third piece I'll add to that as well is along the lines of digital, right? And digital is in the forefront of how accounts are onboarded, how accounts are engaging with the businesses, and so on. So things like device intelligence, that goes a long way. Is this user using Samsung 8? Or if it is using Samsung 8, what is the likelihood of that profile to do open up a lending account, right? So being able to triangulate so much of these very micro level data points and insights and putting that into the machine learning model, that's where I would say we differentiate in a big way.
Excellent. Thank you both for answering that one. And there's kind of a follow-up question, and this one is specific for Socure. And this question says, if I'm using a credit bureau solution today, like Experian Precise ID, what additional or replacement value will Socure provide?
Yeah, another great question that we get asked all the time. I think it depends on which problem you're trying to solve. So generally we can be 20-25% better in increasing auto acceptance rates. So a lot of our banking customers want to programmatically open more accounts, and so generally we're 20-25% better in terms of acceptance rates. On the fraud side, many of our customers are in the 60-80 basis point range in terms of fraud losses. We can generally cut those by 60, 65, 70%. And I know we've done a number of head-to-head champion challengers against Experian in particular, where we've been 5x, 6x more accurate from a false positive perspective. And so what this allows our customers to do is open more good accounts with less friction, and then certainly drive down costs both from a manual review and friction perspective, as well as just overall identity fraud losses.
All right. Great answer. So Kedar, this person looks like they're having some issues with false positives, and so their question is, most ML models suffer from false positives and overfitting. How do you counter that?
Yeah, I mean there is never an absolute right answer here. Most ML models I would say do not, but false positive and overfitting is always a problem that you have to balance for. Quality of data, quality of if it's a supervised model, usually the bias supervised model gives far better results there when it comes to false positive there. But good feature engineering, having cleaner data, cleaning up the data, so on and so forth, that goes a long way. So in addition to kind of using the right techniques to improve your false positive rates or don't overfit, there are techniques that you would use to make sure you have a good balance there. Right? So an example of challenges of overfitting, most of the times there is no clean. I'm getting a little too technical here, but there is no clean event level data when the event happens. Right? So there are these biases that introduce when people build machine learning models that, hey, I'll use the data today, which is 6 months ago, and then start building my model. But more often than not, the features that you would use were not computed when the data was generated 6 months ago. What I mean by that is, let's say there's an IP that has gone bad today, and then you would use that information to build a model on that data 6 months ago. It's going to overfit, right? So these are very nuanced, technical, landmines that you would want to avoid, especially in the fraud domain. So someone who has the expertise of building machine learning models should also understand and appreciate the nuances that are very specific to the fraud world, and anomaly detection. And same thing goes with unsupervised models as well. There is a lot of investment in unsupervised models, and we do that a lot as well. But unsupervised models, by definition, have the challenge of overflagging and generating a lot of false positives because they are broadly designed to catch anomalies as opposed to good and bad. But translating that anomaly into good and bad requires the domain expert to kind of make sure we avoid those challenges. And yeah.
Excellent. Now this is a question for both of you guys, and this is very specific, and I think it's a great question. And this person is asking, can you speak to the success of joint deployments thus far with Socure and Simility?
Sure.
There's so many, Kim. I don't know where we start here. Kedar, do you want to explain? You want me to explain?
Go on.
Awesome. Yeah, no, so I think, I think in financial services in particular, we've seen a large appetite thus far, both in the fintechs as well up through, some top 10 and top 5 banks, where, they have gotten tired or tiresome of the legacy tools, from the credit bureaus, some of the more traditional decision engines, and they, wanted to rip and replace the incumbents, as, it was full of friction, it was full of false positives, it was full of inaccuracies. And so, we have one top fintech in particular where they were looking to decrease KBA, increase auto acceptance, and increase throughput on the front end, where we were able to take their overall approval rates, from the low 60s from an automated perspective, well up into the high 80s, while also cutting fraud rates by 70%, feeding all of that upfront identity information into Simility's engine, where they're able to make, real-time 30, 60, 90 operational controls in place, where they've seen, overall fraud losses drop 85, 90% by deploying Socure on the front end through the orchestration layer, and downstream monitoring with Simility, where they've been able to build tons of different downstream, pretty sophisticated decisioning and orchestration work across the fintech.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Johnny. I think the big value of putting both the identity piece and the orchestration piece together just makes it so easy for our customers to be in charge, be in control, see those losses go down very quickly, and then at the same time make sure that on an ongoing basis, this is not, fraud is not a one-time solution, right? Like you got to be relevant, you got to be always being able to catch the latest trend, being able to stop something before it happens, which you're not aware of. And that's where that combination that we work together, Socure and Simility, just make sure that customers are protected on the entire life cycle of that user.
Yeah, and another great example of this, I mean, I was talking to one of our top 5 banking clients yesterday that was saying, since the deployment of Socure and Simility, they've versus their prior platform and set of tools, they've seen their fraud losses actually drop by over 40%, and that they're actually seeing them get closer to 50% in terms of fraud loss reduction since going live with our solution. So we're certainly excited and looking forward to further series around this webinar, where we actually start to introduce some of the customer success stories with our customers themselves.
That's really exciting, and I know that will be really interesting to a lot of the members of our audience. So this is all the time that we have for questions today. There were a couple that we didn't get to. Again, if you have a question that we didn't respond to, please submit that and we will follow up with you individually. This concludes today's presentation. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our presenters. Please be sure to follow Socure and Simility for additional webinar topics and additional content. Have a great